YouTube channel. Today we are going to see a game between two grandmasters in the Norwegian chess. Gukesh versus Magnus Carlsen. Without wasting any time, let's get into it. Gukesh starts with e4. Then Magnus Carlsen responds by e5, a classic move, as this is usually a book move. Knight f3. They usually do this to attack a pawn, like this one. Ooh, knight c6. A common response to protect the pawn on e5. Also common developing move. Bishop to b5. A usual way because they're doing this to take the c6 knight. Then they'll be able to take the e5 pawn. The f6 knight threatens the e4 pawn. This is a way so that if the b5 bishop takes the knight, this knight can take the other knight, so it'll be an equal trade. So that Magnus Carlsen doesn't lose any pieces. Ooh, the d3 pawn. A common response to push the pawn, develop the bishop, and also protect the e4 pawn. Then, if the bishop takes the c6 knight, this f6 knight cannot take the e4 pawn. Oh, bishop to c5. Aiming to attack here, or maybe even checkmate when Gukesh castles. c3. A response to push a pawn, but it's not a very good one because the b1 knight can only go to a3, can be taken by the bishop, or the knight will just go to d2, which blocks the development of the bishop and blocks the queen move. Castling, a common way to defend any other terrible moves. When you're playing a game in chess, remember to always castle early. Then nobody can attack you very quickly. With checks are very annoying in starting moves. Gukesh also castles. If you castle, you're even more protected than, well, your king in the center. Pawn to d6. d6 as we say it. This allows the bishop to aim more squares. As they say, the more spaces the bishop can move, the more dangerous it becomes. The h3. A common response to make the bishop not be able to go here and take the knight, because the knight is attacking and threatening this pawn. a6. Kicking out the bishop because the bishop has been standing here for some reason in the whole game, just threatening the knight. Now the best common response is to take on c6 because, well, you're just standing there, you could just take it. It's an equal trade. The bishop and knight is 3 points. Now, a fine response, but not very good, because then the b7 pawn could just push 2 steps to b5 to attack the bishop. Because of the a6 pawn, it can get protected without any other piece's help. Pawns are the lowest one, so if they take a piece, it's very good for those opponents that took that pawn from another piece. But a pawn trade is very similar because they're the same point, so it doesn't really give anybody any good thing. But could also give a problem to the opponent because double pawns are the worst. You can't push them. h6. A fine response, but I would rather pick pawn to b5. Rook to e1. Very fine move, makes the rook be more active than usual. Pawn to b5. This attacks the bishop and makes the bishop have to go to b3 or c2. Now the thing with c2, it's totally fine, but underdevelops the bishop even more. But b3 can lead to, for example, bishop to e6, attacking this bishop and gaining a move, which will enable the opponent, Magnus Carlsen, to move any other piece and threaten the opponent, aka Gukesh. Bishop to c2, as expected. Bishop to b6. This makes it go control on the a5 and just a few more squares. Knight to t2. The thing is, it blocks the development of the bishop, but it's still a very fine move. If the knight moved to a3, then the b5 pawn can push to b4, attacking the knight and gaining a move for Magnus Carlsen. Wow. e7. You see, well-known maneuver to g6. If you go to g6, you'll have a better development. Gukesh moves the pawn to attack the other pawn, more likely putting pressure because the pawn is already protected. But this pawn is protected by 3 different pieces: the rook on a1, the bishop on c2, and the queen on d1. Now this is a very smart move from Magnus Carlsen, because if we rewind real quick, and if they took, if this pawn, for example, if Gukesh took, then Magnus Carlsen cannot take back. If Magnus Carlsen takes back, he loses the rook. That's why it didn't happen. That's why the rook moved to b8, to avoid that problem. Pawn to d4. A great way to attack this pawn because this is already protected. And it's also protected by 2 different pieces. And it's getting attacked by 2 different pieces. If they attack with the same amount of defenses, well, they will lose the piece. Let's see the next move. Knight to g6. A fine move because then you're able to protect your king in the castling. If you place a bishop or the knight in this position, there's a very hard way to checkmate the opponent, aka Magnus Carlsen. Knight to f1. Well, there's not only possible ways to save the knight and go and move it correctly, so f1 is a pretty good move. Pawn to c5. Now, this attacks the pawn, this pawn 2 different ways, but it is protected 3 different ways. So that means any one of the pieces that is protecting the pawn can just move. Knight to g3. Not really a fine move. The first move of the game. c7, French dissimilar, Lamer, OP, 23. g3 is not really a very good move. It's kind of like copying Magnus Carlsen. Oh yeah, it's kind of like, this position is very similar if you just tweak some moves and then that. Then it looks like it's like symmetrical. The pawn takes d4. Not a very good move. But then the c3 pawn or the knight Actually, no, you should not take a pawn that is already protected by the pawn because the pawn can take you. So, no. This is what you usually have to do in pawn trades. Two pawns have the equal amount. If they promote, they can change to other pieces. Ooh, pawn to a4. This takes a piece for themselves, but can still be taken two different ways. But that pawn was protected 3 different ways. Now, if you have 2 pieces defending, and you're defending 2 pieces, well, you should not actually defend 2 pieces because that's called overloading. A terrible move if you're a beginner in chess. Because then, if 1 piece has to be taken and then you take that piece, the other piece will be left hanging. Hanging is just a free piece, so the opponent can take your piece. Bishop takes a4. Oh no. Bishop to b7. Common move to attack this pawn, but it's protected 2 different ways and it's attacked 2 different ways, but it still loses. Let's see. Ooh, pawn to d5. The bishop cannot take this or else it will lose the bishop for free because that's a pawn. Ooh, pawn to a5. Pushing the pawn. It's a very good thing if you want to push the pawn if you have less pawns. If you're getting close to the middle game or end game, pawns are very important because if you lose a piece and you don't have pawns, you cannot get them back. Lose the queen, you lose it permanently forever. Now, if the pawn gets at the last place in the board, it promotes to any piece it likes besides the king. Bishop to e3. Yeah, even without the white making clear mistakes, the position is already preferable for black from here on because you just want to attack something or with just a trade, but it's not really worth the risk because you can attack the queen and take the queen for multiple different ways. And bishop to c8, moving back the bishop and attacking with more squares. Remember what I said. This means the bishop is more active. More active means it can go to more squares. That's why you should not make your knight go to the edge of the board because it cannot go anywhere, most likely. Pawn to b3. Okay. So Gukesh did not move 2 steps or else he'll just lose the pawn. There's a bishop trade. It can be taken 2 different ways, by the rook or by the pawn. And it got taken by the rook. Now let's see. Knight to f4. It's a fine move because you penetrate and poke holes into the opponent's position. Poking holes just mean breaking your opponent's position so that you can just go in. Just poking holes like in the ceiling where water is in the above. Bishop to c6. Well, preferable move, but doesn't really do much. Ooh, rook to b4. A fine move, but most likely any other move could be better. Oh. Queen to c2. Not really a very good move. It's a better variation, but not this one. So many mistakes. I shall not buy the computer. g6. Not very good of a move, I guess. No. When you're in a game, do not make so many king moves, because then that will be a mistake. Maybe you could do it, but most likely it also gives you, well, a bunch of checkmates, maybe. And queen to a2. Well, move. But I guess it just protects the pawn from being taken. But it was already protected. And it is also making a battery. A battery is like with two pieces, the same, aligned to attack a piece where it's always protected. This queen and rook is a battery. It can take any piece and still be protected. Two white bishops can do the same thing. If they're aligned in the same position and two white squares, then they can make a battery. Ooh. Yeah, well, you might think this is a not very good move, but it's actually a great move shown by the computer right here. Also, the bishop cannot be taken because it's protected by the knight. The bishop here can be developed and is just attacking it. The best way to play chess is also to attack. Just 5 moves, you're gonna destroy the opponent's position. Ooh, knight to d2. Doesn't really do much, but it's a fine move, I guess. Pawn to... Ooh. Pushes the pawn while being protected by the other pawn, and the knight cannot take. It's protected 3 different ways. Finally, it took the free pawn. Because the knight is here, the rook cannot take this. And this is called the queen trade. Gukesh did not lose a queen. The pawn pushed into h4, attacking the knight because the knight cannot take the pawn and moves in an L shape, which is a 2x1. This position loses a knight, but also loses a rook for Magnus Carlsen. But it can be a rook trade, because if you take, it takes, then you can take the knight. C. Oh, a great move shown by the AI, showing that the rooks are making a battery and protecting each other. This is called a double rook. A double rook is where 2 rooks are protecting each other from any lane because they are a very powerful piece. Let's see what this say. And rook to a2. It's a fine move. Rooks in the 2nd or 7th ranks, yes, there are ranks, are very active. Let's see, king to g7. Fine move to protect your king from any other threats, but there's not really a lot of threats in the game. Rook to a7. Putting pressure on this pawn, but I'm saying pressure, not attacking the pawn, because it's already protected by the king. Rook to d4. The rook is not in danger because nothing is gonna attack it, neither the knight, unless the knight moves here and then be able to take. It. But right now, this is called the evaluation bar and shows how the position is. And Magnus Carlsen is winning. If you don't know, Magnus Carlsen is a 5-time world champion, and he has made a game where he had 100% accuracy, and that has no robot that has ever done that. And this evaluation bar just shows Magnus Carlsen is in the position and just winning. Knight to f3. Attacks the rook to take the rook because the knight has less points than the rook. The rook has 5 points. If you take it, you get the rook, but you can't place it back in the board, obviously. It's gone forever. Unless you make a pawn and then you make a rook. Well, it took the free knight. You might not notice that, but it's not also a very fine move. Oh, takes back with the pawn. If not, then they cannot stop it from promoting into a queen. Ooh. The knight took a not free pawn. Now, Gukesh can either choose of taking the knight or taking the rook. And he took and took with the pawn. Now the king moved. Yeah. The thing is, if you took the knight, you would get +3. But if you took with the rook, you will only get +2 because you lose the knight, which is 3 points. 3 minus 5, obvious math, 2. Pawn to g4. A fine move for a relatively good position. As you can see right here, Gukesh is pretty much losing in the evaluation bar. Right here. Yeah, -3. Bishop took a piece. This can be a bishop trade if the Gukesh's c6 bishop can take that bishop. But if you're doing an opening, do not, I promise you, do not trade a bunch of pieces. You need all of those pieces. And now this pawn is getting pressure by the bishop. And it's only protected by the rook. That's one thing, and it's being attacked by multiple different pieces. It's protected by the rook, and that is why Magnus Carlsen is winning, because mostly all of the pieces are getting protected. Took the bishop for a very good trade. Now they cannot take the b3 pawn. If you got pushed, if Gukesh pushed the pawn, it will immediately lose to the rook. And the bishop trade. I'll take it with the knight. Yeah, that develops the knight. And it's a very, very good move. Ooh. Knight to f4. Attacks the rook because the rook is not defended and has maybe move somewhere or maybe attack the other rook. And rook to c2. I think soon they're gonna do a rook trade. I feel like it. Pawn to h4. Fine move. Not really a very terrible move, but it's a good move because there's a thing called a passed pawn, and it's just a pawn that can never be stopped because there's no pieces in front of it or gonna attack it. And it's most likely going to be in endgames because then you don't have a lot of pieces. Now, king to e6. A fine move to move your king, but don't move your king too much. Now, right now, I don't know if Magnus Carlsen notices, but he can take this pawn right now. So, and knight to g5. This is a check and a fork, but if the king just stays in the same place, like here, it's mate in 1. If it just goes here, actually, it says that it cannot go here. So it's technically a fork and the king has to move somewhere. So that's what they move. And the rook checks it. Very good move. I just like these. They're all champions, all-time champions. Okay. And king to d4. Fine move to move your king out of harm's way. But right now, Gukesh could just take this pawn. The king goes down to threaten and take this rook. The rook moves out of harm's way and pushes the pawn. You know, the knight could go here and then take this pawn at the next move. And checks the king. You know, you usually in middle games or end games, if there's a better way, you always have to most likely find checks. That's the rules. Not really. Now, the king did not take this rook because it's protected by the knight. I told you! They are going to trade. And they traded rooks. Checks with a double fork. Actually, a triple fork because it's a check. It could take this pawn or that pawn. At the next move, they did not take because Gukesh wanted to take this rook. So, Gukesh wanted to protect his rook, and Magnus Carlsen wanted to take the rook. Now, you might be wondering, how did this king get here? Yeah, that's a very big question of mine. Now, the king just made an arch around here. I don't know why. Let's see. d5 attacks the knight, but the knight could just take this pawn. I bet they will. And they took it. Oh, rook to f8. fine move. Ooh, the rook checked the king just to try to do this, which is a fork actually. King to e2. Fine move, because if it took here, then the knight will just be able to take it. A blunder! This is one of the most blunders, because the thing is, Magnus Carlsen thought he would win because he had 2 passed pawns, but this just loses a rook. Are you wondering how? And if the king takes the rook, it loses the rook for free. This is one big blunder, because now Magnus Carlsen is losing by 3 points, which is the knight. How amazing! A world champion. Gukesh. And now Magnus Carlsen tries to push the pawn to make a queen, thinking the knight cannot go there, but the knight has its time, and it was able to get and punish the moves. Now here, the knight could just go there, and it does. It attacks the pawn. But the best move will be pushing, because then if the knight goes, for example, here, then the pawn could go here. But if you make a queen, then they'll take your queen. But the thing is, you don't have to always take a queen. You could always under promote. Then you get a free knight. This is called under promotion. Now, if you always take a queen, it's called queening. But if you take with anything else, it's called under promotion. Pushes the pawn, moves the knight, moves the king. Now the knight could just sacrifice itself. But Gukesh found a great move, moving the knight to a4. This move stopped once moved here, or like if the knight, for example, just a sec. If the knight, for example, moves here, it stops the pawn from queening. If moved here, it will not really do a lot of things, but do the same thing. Pushes the pawn. This is the thing that is mostly the problem, but it's a fine thing, because then the pawn will just be staying here and we'll be able to make a pawn, right? And h5, attacking the g6 pawn. Magnus Carlsen takes h5, and no, that was Gukesh, sorry. Magnus Carlsen is the black. I always get confused with which one is who. Magnus Carlsen moves down. The knight moves to b2, trying to maybe threaten this pawn and have one pawn, but this pawn is getting close to promotion. And when this e3 pawn was pushed, the knight moves to check, king e2, and king e4 by Gukesh, and Magnus Carlsen resigns and slams the table. Now the most coincidental thing is that his king only fell down. I don't know. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you in the next one. Now, if you want to learn more about chess, click on this one. And if you want to see more of my videos, click on this one. Bye-bye! Thank you for watching.
Tall with the fiery glare, In the land of dreams, he's beyond